Some people survive because they fight. Others survive because they refuse to disappear. This is not the story of a hero, a commander, or a famous leader. This is the story of a woman who faced death 3 times at sea and lived to tell it. Her name was Violet Jessop. She was born in 1887 in Argentina to Irish immigrant parents. From the very beginning, life tested her limits. As a child, Violet was diagnosed with tuberculosis. Doctors told her family she would not survive, but she did. That early encounter with death would not be the last. It was only the first warning. After her father died, Violet and her family moved to England. Money was scarce, work was necessary. Her mother became a ship stewardess. Eventually, Violet followed the same path. In her early 20s, she was hired by White Star Line, one of the most powerful shipping companies in the world. Their ships were known for luxury, size, and confidence. They proudly called them unsinkable. Violet's first major assignment was aboard the RMS Olympic, a massive state-of-the-art ocean liner. In 1911, the Olympic collided with a British naval warship. Steel tore against steel. Panic spread through the corridors. The ship survived, and so did Violet. Most people would have walked away from the sea after that. She did not. 1 year later, White Star Line assigned her to a new vessel, larger, grander, and more famous than any ship before it. Its name was Titanic. On April 10, 1912, Violet Jessop stepped aboard. She could not know that history was already moving toward her. And this time, the ocean would not forgive mistakes. The night of April 14th was freezing. The air was still. The sea was like glass. Deep in the ship, Violet was just finishing her duties when a strange, grinding shudder ran through the entire vessel. It wasn't violent, but it was deeply unsettling. The engines stopped. An eerie silence fell. Soon the order came. All hands on deck. Lifeboats were being lowered. At first there was no panic. The Titanic was unsinkable, wasn't it? Many passengers refused to get into the lifeboats, believing it was safer to stay on the giant ship. Violet, along with other stewardesses, was ordered into Lifeboat 16 to show the passengers it was safe. As the boat was being lowered, a ship's officer handed her a baby, telling her to look after it. For 8 hours, Violet clutched the baby to her chest, trying to keep it warm in the freezing darkness, as the screams from the sinking ship faded into the night. When the rescue ship Carpathia arrived, a woman rushed up to Violet, grabbed the baby, and ran off without a word. Violet never knew who she was, or what happened to the child. She had survived the sinking of the Titanic, but her story wasn't over. 4 years later, World War I was raging across Europe. Violet, now a nurse with the British Red Cross, was serving aboard another massive White Star Line ship. This time, it was the HMHS Britannic, the sister ship to the Titanic, converted into a hospital ship. In 1916, while sailing in the Aegean Sea, the Britannic struck a massive underwater mine. The explosion was devastating, far more violent than the iceberg's impact on the Titanic. The ship began to sink incredibly fast, tilting dangerously. Violet and others scrambled for the lifeboats, but as their boat was lowered, it was sucked into the ship's still-turning propellers. The giant blades churned the water, smashing lifeboats to pieces. Violet made a split-second decision. She jumped. She was pulled under the water, her head striking the ship's keel. She thought her end had finally come. But somehow, her thick auburn hair cushioned the blow, and she surfaced, gasping for air, just as another lifeboat pulled her from the water. She had survived her third disaster at sea. Years later, she would suffer from terrible headaches, and a doctor would tell her she had fractured her skull in the escape. Violet Jessop, nicknamed Miss Unsinkable, continued to work at sea for another 34 years, eventually retiring after a career that spanned nearly half a century. She survived tuberculosis, the Olympic collision, the sinking of the Titanic, and the destruction of the Britannic. Her story isn't about fame or power. It's about a quiet, unbreakable resilience, a refusal to be defeated by fate. Violet Jessop didn't just survive, she endured. And in a life filled with chaos and near-death, she held on to her one constant: the sea itself. The night of April 14, 1912, was calm. The sea was like glass, and the sky was filled with stars. Inside the magnificent Titanic, life felt completely ordinary. Passengers were finishing their lavish dinners, laughing in the grand lounges, and preparing for a peaceful night's sleep. One of them was Violet Jessop, a stewardess who was off duty and resting in her cabin. Then, it happened. A sudden, unsettling impact. It wasn't a loud explosion or a dramatic crash, but a long, grinding vibration. as if the massive ship had gently scraped against something it should never have touched. Crew members were quietly told to wake the passengers. But at first, many refused to believe anything was seriously wrong. After all, the Titanic was unsinkable. That's what everyone had been told, a promise of safety and modern marvel. Violet, however, sensed something was different. She quickly put on her uniform and made her way up to the boat deck. The air was bitingly cold, a stark contrast to the warmth and luxury inside. The stars above seemed bright and completely indifferent to the unfolding drama. On deck, officers were already uncovering the lifeboats. There was a palpable tension in the air, a quiet urgency, but not yet outright panic. Violet was ordered to help calm the women and children, many of whom were still in their nightgowns, clutching their belongings. She moved through the growing crowd, repeating the same words over and over. "There is no danger. This is only a precaution." Years later, she would write that these words felt like a lie, even as she said them. As the lifeboats began their descent into the dark water, confusion spread like a virus. The orderly evacuation everyone had drilled for was falling apart. Some boats left the ship half empty, while others were dangerously overfilled. Amidst the chaos, an officer approached Violet and did something completely unexpected. He handed her a baby. There was no explanation, no name, just a silent, bundled child placed into her arms. "Take this," he said, and pointed toward a lifeboat. Without a second thought, Violet obeyed. She stepped into lifeboat 16, holding the child tightly against her chest for warmth and comfort. The boat was lowered into the black, icy water below. From this small vessel, adrift in the vast emptiness of the Atlantic, she watched the Titanic. The colossal ship was still ablaze with lights, its orchestra reportedly still playing, but it was no longer level with the horizon. As the minutes ticked by, the angle grew steeper. The bow dipped lower and lower into the sea, while the stern rose ominously into the air. Then came the sound, a deep, tearing roar that echoed across the water, the sound of metal breaking under an impossible, unimaginable pressure. The Titanic, the unsinkable giant, split apart. The screams of over 1,000 people filled the night, a horrifying chorus that was quickly swallowed by the freezing ocean. The lights flickered and died. Voices, lights, and the certainty of a modern world all vanished into the darkness. Violet sat frozen in the lifeboat, clutching the child, watching a city of dreams disappear beneath the waves. Hours later, as the first light of dawn broke the horizon, the survivors were rescued by the RMS Carpathia. On its crowded deck, surrounded by the dazed and grieving living, a woman suddenly approached Violet. Without saying a single word, she reached out and took the baby from her arms. And that was it. No explanation, no thank you, no goodbye. Violet never saw the child or the woman again. She had survived one of the greatest maritime disasters in history, an event that claimed the lives of over 1,500 people. Most survivors carried the trauma of that night with them for the rest of their lives, never wanting to see the ocean again. But Violet Jessop did something no one expected. She returned to the sea. You might think surviving the Titanic would be enough to keep anyone off the water for good. Most survivors never set foot on an ocean liner again. But Violet Jessop was different. For her, the sea wasn't just a memory of disaster. It was her job, her routine, her way of life. When World War I broke out, the golden age of ocean travel came to an abrupt end. Those magnificent luxury liners were stripped of their finery and repurposed as hospital ships. Their mission shifted from comfort and leisure to rescue and recovery. In 1915, Violet, driven by a sense of duty, signed on as a nurse with the British Red Cross. Her assignment, the HMHS, if that name sounds familiar, it should. The Britannic was the Titanic's younger, bigger, and supposedly stronger sister ship. It was engineered with all the hard-learned lessons from the Titanic disaster. Watertight compartments were extended, and it carried more than enough lifeboats for everyone on board. It was hailed as the safest ship ever built, a vessel designed to be unsinkable, for real this time. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. On the morning of November 21, 1916, the Britannic was gliding through the calm, azure waters of the Aegean Sea, near the Greek island of Kea. The sun was out. The sea was peaceful. It was a picture of perfect tranquility. Then, at 8:12 a.m., that picture was shattered. A colossal explosion tore through the ship's hull. The force of the blast was immense, shaking the gigantic vessel from bow to stern. Water began pouring in at a terrifying rate, far faster than anyone could have imagined. The ship started to list heavily, almost immediately. There was no slow, dawning horror like on the Titanic. Everyone on board knew instantly. This ship was sinking, and it was sinking fast. The order was given: abandon ship. Lifeboats were lowered into the water. But in the chaos, one catastrophic decision led to another. The ship's captain, in a desperate attempt to beach the Britannic on the nearby shore, kept the engines running. This created a deadly vortex. Several lifeboats, filled with people, were sucked backwards into the massive, churning propellers. They were torn to pieces in an instant. It was a horrific scene. Violet was in one of the lifeboats, and she watched in terror as it was pulled relentlessly toward the propellers. She knew she had only seconds to act. In a split-second decision that would ultimately save her, she leaped from the boat into the sea. But her ordeal was far from over. As she plunged into the water, the immense suction from the sinking behemoth pulled her down. She was dragged deep beneath the surface, and her head struck the ship's keel with tremendous force. She later wrote that she felt her skull crack. For a terrifying moment, everything went black, but somehow, she fought her way back to the surface, gasping for air. With what little strength she had left, she swam for her life, putting as much distance as she could between herself and the dying ship. Just minutes later, she watched as the magnificent HMHS Britannic rolled onto its side and disappeared beneath the waves. The unsinkable ship sank in just 55 minutes. 30 people lost their lives that day, and Violet Jessop had survived. Again, the story doesn't even end there. Years later, after suffering from persistent headaches, an X-ray revealed something astonishing. She had indeed fractured her skull during the sinking of the Britannic and had been living with it, completely unaware, for years. Two sister ships, two of the most infamous maritime disasters in history, two seemingly impossible escapes. Most people would call it quits after that, but not Violet Jessop. Her career at sea wasn't over yet. She would return to the ocean one more time, cementing her legacy as one of the most incredible survivors the world has ever known. After surviving the sinking of the Titanic and the Britannic, you'd think Violet Jessop would never set foot on a ship again, and honestly, who could blame her? Most people would have walked away from the sea forever, but Violet wasn't most people. When World War I ended, she didn't just return to civilian life. She returned to the one place that had nearly claimed her life twice. She went back to the sea. For years, Violet continued her career as a stewardess, sailing on passenger ships that crossed the globe. The ocean had tried to swallow her whole, not once, but twice, yet she chose to face it, day after day. It's an astonishing amount of courage, but you'd never hear her describe it that way. Violet never called herself brave, or even lucky. In her own words, she was simply doing her job. That's it. No drama, no grand statements. Later in her life, in 1958, she published her memoir, titled Titanic Survivor. If you were expecting a dramatic, sensational account, you'd be surprised. The book is calm, measured, almost detached. She recounted these world-shaking disasters without trying to dramatize them or seek any sort of attention. It reads like the story of someone who had looked fate in the eye, accepted its hand, and just kept moving forward. So, let's recap the unbelievable story of this woman. She was aboard the RMS Olympic in 1911 when it collided with the HMS Hawke. She survived. A year later, she was a stewardess on the RMS Titanic. We all know how that ended. She got into lifeboat 16 and survived. Then, during the war, she served as a nurse on the HMHS Britannic, Titanic's sister ship, which was repurposed as a hospital ship. In 1916, it struck a mine and sank. Violet jumped overboard and, despite a head injury, survived that too. 3 sister ships, 3 separate disasters, and one woman who lived through them all. Violet Jessop lived a long, full life after these events. She retired quietly and spent her final years gardening in a small cottage in England. She passed away in 1971 at the age of 83. There were no monuments built for her, no major headlines marking her death. Her name isn't one that most people learn in history class. Yet, her story is one of the most extraordinary tales of survival in modern history. Violet Jessop didn't change the world with groundbreaking inventions or by holding a position of power. Her legacy is quieter, but perhaps just as profound. She changed the world by surviving, by continuing, by refusing to let fear write the final chapter of her story. Her life is a powerful reminder that sometimes the greatest strength isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes it's about the quiet, unyielding power to simply endure. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this story as incredible as I did, Please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel for more hidden histories. We'll see you in the next one.